In the spring of 2016, Ethereum was 1 year old. The network was running. The smart contracts were executing. A small but growing community of developers, investors, and idealists had decided that this technology was going to change how human institutions operated, not incrementally, fundamentally. They believed that the code was the law, that contracts written onto a blockchain would execute exactly as written, with no room for corruption, manipulation, or human error. On June 17, 2016, someone found the room. What happened in the months that followed changed the trajectory of Ethereum, introduced one of the most difficult philosophical debates in the history of decentralized technology, and resulted in the creation of an entirely new blockchain. And the person who started all of it has never been identified. The story begins with the DAO. DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. The concept was simple in theory and radical in practice. A company with no CEO, no board, no headquarters, and no employees. A set of rules encoded directly into a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain, governed entirely by the votes of its token holders. Every spending decision, every investment, every allocation of funds would be made by a democratic vote of participants. And once a proposal received enough votes, the smart contract would execute it automatically. No human approval required. No possibility of a rogue executive raiding the treasury. The code was the lock, and the token holders held the only keys. The DAO was created by a German blockchain developer named Christoph Jensch, who had been involved in building the early Ethereum codebase. He released the DAO's open-source code in April 2016. His original ambition was modest. He hoped to raise $5 to $10 million to fund a specific project. What happened instead was something neither he nor anyone else anticipated. The token sale opened. Money poured in. By the time the 28-day sale closed in late May 2016, over 11,000 investors had deposited Ether into the DAO's smart contract. The total raised approximately $150 million, representing roughly 14% of all Ether in circulation at the time. It was, at that point, one of the largest crowdfunding campaigns in human history. It was also attracting concern. Before the sale had even concluded, several developers and security researchers were publishing warnings. There were vulnerabilities in the DAO's code. Specifically, there was a problem with the way the DAO's smart contract handled withdrawals. The contract allowed investors who disagreed with a proposal to split off from the main DAO, to exit with their share of the funds into what the code called a child DAO. The mechanism was designed as a democratic safety valve, but the implementation had a flaw. The flaw was what cryptographers call a reentrancy vulnerability. When the withdrawal function was called, the contract would send the requested funds to the recipient before it updated its own internal record of how much that recipient had already withdrawn. In theory, a malicious actor could write a contract that, upon receiving the funds, immediately called the withdrawal function again, before the first transaction had finished recording, and again, in an automated loop, draining funds faster than the contract's accounting could track. Developers flagged this. The DAO's team acknowledged it. They said a fix was coming. On June 17, 2016, the fix had not arrived. At approximately 3:34 in the morning UTC, an unknown actor began executing a reentrancy attack against the DAO's smart contract. The attack was methodical. The attacker's code called the withdrawal function, received Ether, called the withdrawal function again before the first call was recorded, received more ether, and repeated the cycle, again and again and again, in what amounted to an automated cascade of recursive withdrawals. By the time anyone noticed what was happening and began sounding the alarm in Ethereum developer channels and on Reddit, the attacker had siphoned approximately 3.6 million ether into a child DAO under their control at the prices of June 17, 2016. That was worth roughly $60 million. It represented about 1/3 of all the funds in the DAO. The price of ether dropped from above $20 to below $13 within hours. Here is the detail that saves the story from immediate catastrophe. The rules of the DAO itself required that funds withdrawn into a child DAO be locked for 28 days before they could be moved. The attacker had the money. They could not yet spend it. The clock had started. The Ethereum community had 28 days to figure out what to do. What followed was one of the most urgent and consequential debates in the history of decentralized technology. The core question was deceptively simple. Should Ethereum intervene? On one side, the pragmatists, Vitalik Buterin, Ethereum's co-founder, and then as now its most prominent figure, favored intervention. The theft was real. The harm was real. The technical mechanism existed to undo it. A hard fork, a change to the Ethereum protocol, could rewrite the blockchain's history to move the stolen funds from the attacker's child, DAO, to a recovery contract, effectively unstealing the money. Yes, it would mean the blockchain was not truly immutable, but immutability in service of an obvious injustice was not a principle worth protecting at any cost. On the other side, the idealists. To many in the Ethereum community and the broader crypto world, the point of a blockchain was precisely that it was immutable. Code is law was not a slogan. It was the founding premise. The DAO's code, however flawed, had executed exactly as written. The attacker had found a valid path through the rules. If the community could rewrite the ledger whenever the outcome was politically or emotionally inconvenient, what exactly was the point of the decentralized trust they had all signed up for? Today, it was a hack. Tomorrow, it could be a government demanding a freeze. The precedent was the problem. The attacker, or someone claiming to be the attacker, sent a message to the Ethereum community during the debate. They argued that their actions were not theft. They had used the contract exactly as it was written. They threatened legal action against anyone who attempted to reverse their gains. Whether the message was genuine or a bluff, it deepened the philosophical tension. A Robin Hood group of white hat hackers, seeing the debate unfold, took matters into their own hands. Using the same reentrancy exploit, they began draining the DAO themselves, racing to move funds into their own child DAOs before the attacker could drain more. The idea was to rescue the money and refund it to legitimate investors. They managed to recover a portion, but the primary attacker was still holding millions, and the clock was still running. The attacker, through an intermediary, reportedly offered a reward, 1 million ether and 100 Bitcoin to any miners who would resist the proposed soft fork that would have blacklisted the stolen funds. The bribe was an attempt to prevent the consensus needed for intervention. It didn't work. On July 20th, 2016, at block 192,000, the Ethereum hard fork was implemented. The fork rewrote history. In the new Ethereum, the DAO attack had never successfully drained the funds. The stolen ether was redirected to a recovery contract. Investors who had lost money in the DAS were made whole. The hacker, in the forked chain, walked away with nothing. But the old chain kept running. A portion of the Ethereum community, the ideological maximalists, The code is law absolutists refused to recognize the fork. They continued mining the original chain. They continued transacting on it. Over time, this chain acquired a market, an identity, and a name, Ethereum Classic. The hackers' stolen ether on this chain remained in their child DAO. Eventually, as the lockup period ended, it was theirs. To this day, no one knows who conducted the attack. The wallet addresses are publicly visible on the Ethereum Classic blockchain. The funds moved, but the person behind them has never been identified, charged, or named. It is one of the great unsolved mysteries in the history of crypto crime. What the DAO hack left behind goes far beyond the $60 million and the two competing chains. It established, for the first time, with real stakes, that the Ethereum community would make governance decisions, that the network was not purely governed by code, but by the humans who ran it. The idealists were right that this was a precedent. The pragmatists were right that the alternative, watching an obvious injustice stand uncorrected, was also a precedent, and a worse one. The hack accelerated the shift in crypto fundraising from DAOs to initial coin offerings, a move that brought its own wave of fraud and regulation in 2017 and 2018. It put smart contract security on the agenda for every serious blockchain project that followed. It established reentrancy as the class of vulnerability that every Solidity developer needs to understand before shipping a single line of contract code. It also established something quieter but equally important, that the Ethereum community could act under pressure, reach consensus, and implement a massive technical change in less than 30 days. That was not a given. The fact that it happened, messily, controversially, imperfectly, is part of why Ethereum is what it is today. The person who found the flaw in the DAO's code, who ran the exploit in the early hours of June 17, 2016, who triggered the most consequential governance crisis in blockchain history, they are still out there, somewhere, holding in whatever form the funds eventually took, the proceeds of the theft that changed everything. If you want to understand how the decisions made in those 28 days in the summer of 2016 still shape every smart contract audited today, subscribe, because this is where the modern rules were written.